Alright, this is video 4 of my series creating the best tournament brackets. The video is going to talk about 32 team tournaments. In the past 3 videos we've talked about 4 team, 8 team, and 16 team tournaments. And now we're on to 32. If you haven't seen the first 3 videos in the series, you might want to go back and take a look at that and the links above because we're going to use a lot of the terminology and refer to some of the concepts that we learned back in those previous videos, including the fact that one of the most important things we've learned along our series of videos is that in order to have an effective tournament, what you need to do is use at least a double elimination approach. I haven't mentioned it, but I'm actually a big fan of triple elimination tournaments, but those are a little more complicated, and we'll focus on double elimination tournaments for now. If you want to get good outcomes, what you really need to use is at least a double elimination tournament. And the reason is because when you go to a single elimination tournament, what happens is that there's too much of a chance of good teams meeting up in early rounds, and as soon as you do that, they get out of the mix and they're not allowed to recover. In a double elimination tournament, if everything goes according to how it should, at least the top 2 teams will finish 1 and 2. What we're looking for in our tournaments is how well can we design a tournament to allow 3, 4, 5, and everybody else to fall to their level in the tournament outcome. The best way to do this in these tournaments is to use a double elimination approach, but it's not just that simple, because as soon as the tournaments get a little bit bigger, you have different ways of creating or setting up the losers brackets in a double elimination tournament. And what we found in our previous videos is that the best way to do this to get the best outcomes is to use what we call a crossover approach, where losers in the winners bracket move to different brackets when they move to the loser's side of the tournament. And so in this case, you can see, for example, the loser of game 7, which is in the top bracket, moves down into the bottom bracket when he's on the loser side of the tournament. And similarly, now loser of 8 starts in the bottom and comes to the top. When we go back and look at the video for 16 teams, it gets more complicated and there's a lot more options. But in the end, what we're always going to do is have a crossover approach to get us to the best results. What we're talking about in terms of getting the best results is we're optimizing the results for the 3rd best teams and below. That's what we want to be looking for. So here's the brackets, what you get when things get bigger. Here's an example of a 16 team bracket. The best approach to use in a 16 team tournament, according to the modeling that we did and talked about in the previous video, you still use a crossover approach. And so, but there's a lot more options for crossovers, and so you have to be careful and be very thoughtful about what type of crossover that you're going to use. What we showed for 16 team tournament is that what we're going to do is we're going to switch A and B with C and D. You can see that loser of A is in the top bracket, then moves into the bottom bracket in the losers bracket. Same for B, starts in the top, loser goes to the bottom, and then you can take C and D from the bottom, move them up to the top. As we say, you have to be thoughtful about it because it's not always that way. This is what you can do in the first round, but in the second round, for example, now the best approach is, if you do this in the first round, what you want to do in the second round is keep them in the same bracket. So game E comes right back here and stays on the top bracket, goes into the loser bracket there. Same thing for F. And in the description that we use for talking about these setups is that on the winners bracket size, we always start game A is on the top, then you go down A, B, C, D, and then that's the first round. It's not technically not the first round, but it's the first round that we have to worry about. And then the second round, you have E and F. In the losers bracket, what we're going to do is we're going to look from top to bottom and see which loser we put into what position. So as the setup I have here, so the loser of C goes into the first spot at the top, loser D goes into the second, and then A and B. So we're going to call this C, D, A, B, and then we're going to look at the loser bracket in the second round. It's E, F. This bracket that I have here is C, D, A, B, E, F. This was the best performing setup that we had for a 16 team tournament. The alternate, which was the second best version, was B, A, D, C, F, E, and you can imagine how that would be. So loser B, A, D, C, and then F, and E. So let's talk about a 32-team tournament. Whenever I do this, I always start by talking about a single elimination tournament. So here's the setup for a 32-team single elimination tournament. I have put the teams in seeded from 1 to 32, and so these are the matchups that you would have in a correctly seeded single elimination tournament. You need to have good seeding, because if you were to put teams into the brackets in a random fashion, there would be actually a 48% chance that the number 1 and 2 teams will meet before the finals, and so that's never good. What we, if we want a tournament that reflects the best teams finishing in the best positions, we'd want to have the 1 and 2 teams in the opposite brackets, and that's what you can see when we have it seeded. But if it's done randomly, it's only a 51% chance that the number 2 team is on this side of the bracket versus number 1. Seeding becomes very critical when you're looking at a single elimination tournament. On the other hand, if you could see the teams that accurately in the first place, you wouldn't need a tournament in order to figure out who's best. An alternate way to do it is through our double elimination tournament. I didn't mention, if you do put the teams in the 32 positions in a random fashion, there's something like, if I remember right, there's 63 million, maybe I'm misremembering. There's lots and lots of ways you can do this, and it's countless, and there's way too many ways to even think about it. But even as a double elimination tournament, there are millions of options on how you can operate this tournament. Once again, we're going to have the brackets set up so that A is on the top and it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and that's in the first round, and the second round is I, J, K, L, and then M and N in the third round. If you think about the possibilities, what we could say, so the loser of game A here could go into this position or that position or that position, that one can go any one of these positions. And once you do that, then the loser of game B can go into any one of the other positions, etc., etc., etc. The loser of game I can go into any one of these 4 positions, and so I, J, K, and L can be distributed throughout there. And then M and N, there's only 2 options in here. If I did my math right, I think there's 2 million different ways that you can do this. And so it's not necessarily something that we can study. I'm not going to examine all 2 million options. If I remember right, when we did a 16-team tournament, there was only 48 options. And so I could do all 48 and give them all a try, but I'm not going to look at all 2 million options that you have for setting up a 32-team double elimination tournament. Given the setup, we can use the same type of notation, and just to make sure that we know what we're talking about in terms of describing how we're going to set up our tournament. We're going to use the same type of nomenclature that we used before. Again, in the winner bracket side, we start at the top with A and then go down to the bottom, and so then it's A through H, I through L, M and L. In the loser bracket side, we're going to start at the top and see how this is described. And so if the loser of A comes into this position, and so that will be an A here, and so then we can start at the top and look down. The loser's bracket setup is going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And then we go to the next round, I, J, K, L, and then to the final round, M and N. This type of setup, remember, is what we call a homostatic approach, because it means that the loser of game A goes straight back and doesn't cross over any brackets. So this is a homostatic transition to the loser's bracket. Similarly, I here is going back homostatic because it's not changing brackets. J is staying in here, so that's a homostatic, and then M is going back in a homostatic, and so this is a completely homostatic setup for our loser's bracket. If we wanted to move things around, for example, what we could do is, instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, what we could do is turn them around and bring E, F, G, H to the top. And so that's what we have here. And so now this setup would be E, F, G, H, A, B, C, D, because that's the direction that it goes. So the loser of E comes up to this position here. And at the same time, we're going to take I, J, K, L. We're going to flip them as well. And so this is going to be K, L, I, J. And so we flip those over. On the other hand, M and N are going to be in their same position. So M and N are going to be homostatic transitions where everybody else is going to be flipped to some level. There's a lot of different ways to flip that. I mean, you could flip A and B, and you would actually have a very big difference at that point in the outcome. So lots of different options. There are 2 million options. What are we going to do? Well, one thing we learned when we did a 16-team tournament is that not all the options are necessary to study. So in the 16-team tournament, we started with 48 different possibilities. By the time we were done, we had decided that there were only 14 unique ones that even needed to be covered. And of these 14 unique ones, most of them weren't actually worth looking at. So the same thing will happen here. And so there's a lot of reasons to think that we don't have to cover all 2 million different options. For example, lots of the bracket setups are redundant. For example, they can be inherently redundant. So look at, if I take my A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I'll only worry about the first round, and I could flip A and B, but keep everybody else the same. But you can convince yourself that that's going to be the same as if I kept A, B the same and only flipped C and D, or if I flipped E and F, or if I flipped H and G. You can see that these things are all going to be equal, and we can actually define that if we wanted to from an objective point of view. You can see that these are all the same because they have the characteristics. 6 of the positions are homostatic in the first round, and the 2 that are not homostatic are flipped within the same bracket. Okay, so within the same group of 1, 2, 3, I guess 8. So within the same group of 8, they're flipped. If you wanted to, you could write this out, and I think it would be a linear algebra problem that you would have to solve this way. But you could actually make that to define each of the different setups in this way, talking about the level of homostasicity and what crossovers do actually occur. So for example, these things are inherently redundant, so exactly equal. These 2 terms here, so CDAB, GHEF, I think you will find that they are practically redundant. They aren't, it doesn't have to be the case, but I think you'll find that they are in practice going to be the same. And the reason is because if you look at the transitions that have occurred here, that there's no homostatic transitions to the back, and so that's the first thing. And the crossovers that occur are actually all the same as well, except these within this group of DC here, and I don't think those are important, and so otherwise it's pretty much the same. So these end up being practically the same, so we don't have to worry about them. The other thing we learned in our tournament of 16 is that even some of the unique bracket setups are not all that interesting or significant. And the biggest problem that you have is partial crossovers or halfway crossovers. So if you look at something like EFGH, ABCD. So what we've done is, if you start with ABCD, EFGH, and start with a homostatic approach, what you've done is you've taken everybody from the bottom and moved them all to the top. 4 from the bottom, now you have 4 on top, and you've moved all 4 of them. There's an intermediate case where if you take your ABCDEFGH and you flip EF and AB. So you're going to take that, but you're only going to move the top ones over, and you're going to keep CDGH going to be the same. And so if you look at it, this is there's no homostatic moves on the first one, and there's 4 homostatic moves on the last one. And so you can see that this is kind of part way. And when we had these things, and we did the analysis of this back in the 16-team tournament, and what we found out is that the result you got for this was basically halfway between that of a pure homostatic approach and the completely non-homostatic approach. So it doesn't do any good to actually go halfway measures. These are always going to be better than that, mainly because if you remember, the homostatic approach was always the worst approach. So the farther you can move away from homostatic, the better you're going to do. And so if you're only going halfway, you're not going to get there. So that's what we learned along the way. That's the approach that we're going to take in this analysis. And taking that into account, what I figured is that there's probably about 30 relevant setups that we needed to consider. And so I did an analysis of 30 different brackets. For the first round, what we've got is the homostatic approach, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Then we're going to make all non-homostatic approaches. So B, A, D, C, F, E, H, G. There's C, D, A, B, G, H, E, F. And there's E, F, G, H, A, B, C, D. So if I think about what happens, so you take A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and you're going to flip them B, A, D, C. And then you're going to take A, B, C, D, and you flip it like this, and that gives you C, D, B, C, D, A, B. And then you're going to take E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and then you're going to flip it and go E, F, G, H. So it's 4 of them changing. And then the last one is one where you're going to take all 4 of these, but you're going to take GH and AB and trade them, and EF and CD and trade them. This is going to give you unique results, and you're going to see that along the way. To a large extent, there's going to be unique. There's actually a lot of similarity between those two, but this actually does make a difference. We will address a little bit later the possibility of HGFEDCBA. I don't think there's any real difference between that and this. It's not quite clear. There's some conflicting results, but I really don't think there's a difference between them. But so these are going to be the 5 first round setups that we're going to use. Then the second round you can do IJKL, which is a homostatic approach, and then you can do JILK, or you could do KLIJ. So those are the 3. LKIJ I don't think is going to be any different. And then for the last one you have either MN or NN. 5 of these, 3 of these, 2 of those gives us a total of 30 different possibilities. So let's see what happens, all right? We're going to start with the 32-team double elimination tournament with a homostatic approach. So that means it's going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N. Here's a whole bunch of numbers that you can see. A couple things that we're looking at here. I've looked at the outcome for the simulated tournament, and I've looked how likely is a given team to show up in a given position. So a couple of the assumptions that go into the modeling. First of all, there are teams of 32 different qualities, and they go into the brackets randomly. And so this is a random population of the brackets of all 32 teams. And in the analysis, I treat it as the better team always advances. And so we don't have to worry about the possibility of somebody coming back and getting upset or anything like that. No upsets occur. In the analysis, I did about, I think it's about 20,000 simulations that I use. So 20,000 simulated tournaments. And so there's some variation in the actual numbers. I don't know, it's about 0.5%, give or take, depending on the size of the number. But that's the kind of variation that we might see in some of the places. So here's what we find for homostatic approach. And so we're going to start here. The best team, so this goes over here, this tells you the quality of the team. The best team ends up finishing first 100% of the time. Anytime you do this in a double elimination team tournament, actually the first and second team will always finish first and second in a double elimination tournament. So the real question is how well does it do for the third best team? The third best team comes in third, 77.5%. That's actually not too bad. It's a little bit lower than we had for the 16-team tournament, and a little lower than we had for the 18 tournament. I think for the 16-team tournament, I think it was about 80%. But we're still, more than 3/4 of the time, the third best team finishes third, and that's actually doing pretty well. You get below that, it gets a little tougher. The fourth best team finishes fourth only 40% of the time, but that's still it's most likely to end up in the fourth position. The fifth best team is most likely to end up, well, in that 5th or 6th spot. We don't know exactly where it would be because we don't make a distinction between 5th and 6th in these tournaments. So 5th and 6th best teams prefer being in the 5th or 6th spot. If they face each other, then it's going to be 5 and 6, and that's all going to be right. 7th best team, that's actually weird. It's more likely to actually either finish in the 5th or 6th or the 9th and 12th than it is in the 7th or 8th. Okay. Same for the 8th best team, is much more likely to finish 9th and 12th. And this is what happens as you start getting these lower teams. The odds that they see some of these better teams early on in the tournament gets higher, and so that's where that goes. On the other hand, the 9th best team is going to finish 9th, 10th through 12th, going to be still there. The 17th best team is going to finish 7th, great. The 25th best team, most likely to finish 25th, that's good. Even the 31st best team, most likely to finish in the last group, but there's also a chance that it can finish in the 17th in the second one. And what this means is that it won a game, and what it means is that it was in the same bracket as the worst team, right? So what is the probability of the 31st and 32nd team to being in the same group of 4? It's 10%, and that's what you're measuring there. That's something that, the way this tournament is set up, it is inevitable. You can't beat that type of thing. The other thing I always like to look at is how bad your teams can be and still finish high. So for example, if you look up here, in third place, third best team is most likely to finish third, then it drops off, and by the time you're out to 10, you don't have any measurable data here, but you actually do. If you look at the actual numbers, there is a 7 in 100,000 chance this happened once or twice in my simulations, that the 12th best team actually finished third. In terms of fourth place, it was the 14th best team got there. Fifth or sixth place, the 22nd best team got there. Seventh or eighth place, the 24th best team. 29th best team finished as high as 9th. 30th best team got into the 13 to 16, but that means it beat 31 and 32. That's what that means. So it actually won two games. So this is the extent to how far out it can go to have bad teams finishing high. These are types of things I don't want happening in my tournaments, and so when I assess my tournaments, these are the kind of things that I really don't like. Low teams finishing high, but also seeing high teams finishing low. Those are the things we want to avoid. One thing we should look at is look at how the outcome for the third best team, because this is the best team that's not automatic. Like we said, it's 77.5% to come in third. The problem with a homostatic approach is that if they don't come in third, it comes in fifth, and that's about 18%. And so that accounts about 95% of it. If they don't come in fifth, then they're way down to 12th or 9th. And if they're not in 9th, they're all the way down at 17th. There's actually a legitimate amount, less than 1%, but still a real amount that shows up in that 17th to 24. So they really got stuck in the same wrong brackets as the 1 and 2 teams. And so they end up beating each other up. And we don't want that to happen. But this is the baseline and that we have. Now remember, this is a homostatic approach, and homostatic approach is almost always the worst performing type of bracket. So everything we're going to see is going to be better than this. All right. So how does it get better? And so that was a homostatic approach. Let's see what happens if we start looking at some crossover. So the first crossover we're going to do is we're going to take our homostatic approach, and we're just going to take the A's and B's and flip them like that. All right, so we're not moving anybody up and down or anything. All we're going to do is flip A and B in this direction, and you can see what happens. It doesn't have an effect on anything in third. In fact, it doesn't have any effect on anything except on that group that ended up at 17th. Right, so we had a non-trivial amount that was out in finishing 17th to 24th place. Now, if we do just that simple crossover of switching AB to BA, now you can move that up into 13th, and so we've moved them up in a category. So they've won an extra game. That's what that means. On the other hand, it's still not great because they're still way down here at 13th. We still have this nothing at 7th or 8th, nothing at 4th. But this is what happens when you make a little change like that. Clearly, this is not a significant change to the bracket that you're making at that point. Well, let's take a look at a second one. So instead of having just flipping that over, let's take A, B, C, and D, and let's trade them. And so let's go to C, D, A, B. That's this one right here. And you can see a couple things happen. So now it's not the 17th to 13th. Hey, in fact, it is. You lose the 17th to 13th, but it doesn't even go to 13th. It goes beyond that, all the way up to 9th to 12th. And a lot of this stuff in 9th through 12th now moves into the 7th and 8th. And so you can see that this is a significant improvement over the ones above because we've taken everything out of this 13th and 13th through 24th. Your third best team no longer is finishing 13th. And even the extent that it's finishing 9th through 12th is even much less, only a third as much finishing 9th through 12th, and you've moved them into the 7th and 8th position. So that's a good thing to be able to do. Let's do the EFGH. So let's move them, all 4 teams, from top to bottom. So we're going to move it there. What happens here is, oh look, we got all zeros. So again, we've moved it enough so there's no 13th through 24th anymore. So that's all gone. There's still a small amount in 9th and 12th, but now by making that move, we've actually taken the stuff that was in 7th and 8th here and gotten rid of that, moved that up. And we've taken some of this stuff that was 5th and 6th, and we've moved that into 4th place. So by making this type of a change, we've moved the third best team into 3rd and 4th place more so. So increase the amount in 3rd and 4th place. There's still quite a bit in 5th and 6th, but we can handle that. But it's still much better than not as much in 5th or 6th and move that into 4th. So that's much better. Just for the comparison, notice it doesn't matter if we do EFGH or if we do GHEF. We get pretty much the same effect. And so as long as we move teams completely across brackets, from all the teams from the top to the bottom and vice versa, then we get the same type of result for the third best. Now let's think about what we get if we do the second round. And so here's IJKL. So this is our homostatic line again, against which we compare. Now we're going to compare and do JIKL, our 4 second round matches, and we're going to flip them like this. Well, the effect of doing that is we've taken our 9th through 12th stuff and we moved them all the way or back into 7th and 8th. And so one could imagine, look up here, we still always had 9th through 12th on this one, but if we flip the JILK, now we can move stuff out of the 9th through 12th position and move that back into the 8th position. And so that's going to be an improvement. So that's what happens there. If we go to KLIJ, so now we're going to take and completely cross them over like this, you can see that again, this is a way to move things in from 5th and 6th up to the 4th position. Instead of 18% here, we've moved 14 out of that 18% all the way up into 4th. We've taken that 4% out of 9th and 12th and moved that into the remaining in 5th and 6th, so that's what's remaining. But the one thing that happens though is, regardless of that, we still have this little component over here that's finishing 17th and 24th, and that's because we have a homostatic approach for the first round. As long as we have that homostatic approach from the first round, we're always going to have that 0.6% at that position here. And then the last thing we can look at is what happens if we flip the round 3, so MN versus NM. And you can see the big difference here is that we've taken the 18% that was in 5th or 6th and we moved it completely out of there and we moved it into 4th. And so now you can look at a result and say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, N, M. We've got 95% of the time our number 3 team finishes in 3rd or 4th position. It's still not perfect because there's a lot of stuff down here and finishing 9th and 12th and 17th and 20 through 24th. What our hope is that if we do enough changing things around, perhaps the combination of those things will put a lot of the results up into this area. One thing you can notice here and that you're going to see is that no matter what we do, we don't really affect the outcome for the 3rd place. So the 3rd best team finishes 3rd about 77.5% of the time, and that really doesn't change, or actually it doesn't change. This is all within the noise, and this is the level of the noise that we have. That doesn't change regardless of what you do for crossovers or anything like that. So this is constant throughout everything you do. So it doesn't matter whether it's homostatic or completely crossed over, you're still going to have that for 3rd, but there are big differences as you look at 4th and below. What I've done here is give you the top performing setups for the 3rd best team. I have done all 30 of these possibilities for this double elimination tournament and looked at the results of the 3rd best team. This is only the top 10 because everybody else is somewhere between here and there. And I've just used an assessment on this, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're assessing. But in the end, here are the top 3 performing bracket setups that we use. The number 1 bracket that we have for the number 3 team is GHEFCDABKLIJMN, and you can see the good things about this bracket is, for example, the 3rd best team finishes 3rd and 4th 95% of the time, and that's really good. On the other hand, if it doesn't finish 3rd or 4th, the other 5% is distributed between 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. And notice that there's nothing down here in the 17th through 24th or anything like that. So in this type of setup, your 3rd best team never finishes lower than 8th. And that's really good because remember on the previous slide, we had these types of things where it could finish, there was more than 4% was finishing 9th and below, but in this setup, you never finish anything below 8th. In my assessment, I called this one the best overall performing setup, mainly because it has the biggest amount coming into 3rd and 4th place. The other ones I have, they don't perform quite as well in terms of 4th place, and notice that the difference lies in the 4th place position. They're not quite as good in the 4th best, but if you're not in 3rd or 4th, you're much more likely to be in 5th as you are to being 7th. And so there's an advantage in that. And so if you look at it in terms of 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, these two are the best way to go about it, and so that gives them an advantage, and there's a reason to like that. But still, overall, I prefer this one right here. I should just point out, in terms of balancing these assessments and things like that, I have these two rated higher than something like, how about this one, CDAB, GHEF, IJKL, and M. This is one where there is a much bigger contribution, so 95%, more than 95% of them finishing 3rd or 4th. That's better than what you see for these two brackets here. But at the same time, if you're not 3rd or 4th, you're way down here at 7th or even 9th. The other 5% is distributed between 7th or even 9th through 12. I don't like it when good teams finish low in my tournament. I'm going to give some preference toward the tournaments that give me zeros out here. There's another one that does that up here. This is the one that gives me zeros out here, but at the same time, if you look now, the chance of finishing 3rd or 4th is much lower than it is for some of the other ones. And so in terms of my overall assessment, this is the kind of things I take into account. How likely is the team to get into not just the position that it's supposed to be, the 3rd best, but how likely is it to be close to the 3rd best? And how likely is it not to be very far away from the 3rd best, right? So teams that get me out at 9% and 9th or higher, brackets that get me there are things I don't like very much. And I like to see my teams finishing up here, especially at 3rd and 4th, and looking then secondarily at 5th. All right, the 4th best team. I realize the formatting on this is a little ugly, and so it's kind of small. With lots of numbers around. First thing to notice on the 4th best team is that the likelihood of the 4th best team finishing 3rd does not depend on anything, so it doesn't matter what bracket you're going to use. Let's look at the top performing ones. In fact, this one I have 3 of them that I call pretty much equal to each other, and then one that falls a little bit behind. The things that I really like about when it comes to the 4th best team, I've added an extra criterion in there, and so we can look at, it doesn't do any good to look at how well they finished 3rd. We do want to know how they finished 4th, and we want to pay attention to how they finished 5th. And so there is some variation there. And then we want to minimize how much they finish lower than 6th and that. And so the one column I've added is I've added up the 3rd through 6th. How likely are they to finish in this region? And you can see that best performing ones are like 91%, and then there's a whole group of them at 90%. And so there's a distinction between that. So 91% is really good, but on the other hand, the problem with that, the 4th best team is most likely to finish 3rd through 6th, but if you look at their likelihood of finishing 4th, it's actually a little bit lower. So a lot of that is put into the 5th and 6th. And so these teams, on the other hand, have about the same probability of finishing 4th, and they're more likely than not for the 4th best team to finish 4th, but then they back off a little bit. But so overall, they're a little bit lower, but those are the same in that way in terms of the best team here. So if you don't finish 4th through 6th, you're more likely to finish 7th, which is better than finishing 9th. And so that's kind of how these things, and so that bracket is better than that bracket, because if you don't finish in the top 6, in this one you're most likely to finish 7th. Here you're split between 7th and 9th. So those are kind of the different ways of thinking about it. I think what's most interesting about this, though, is to look at the brackets that are at the top. And so one of the 3 top performing brackets is GHEF, CDAB, JILK, and M. And I don't know if you remember, but in fact that was one of the top 3 that showed up for on the previous slide for the number 3 team. This one here, EF, GH, AB, CD, JILK, and M, this was another one of the top 3. He's a little bit lower in this one, down to the top 5, so he's outside of the best, but he's still performing really high. What's most interesting is the one you don't see here, and that is GH, EF, CD, AB, KL, IJ, MN. The reason that's interesting because that was the one that was the best performing bracket for the number 3 team, but if you look at that, it's not even in the top 10 for the 4th best team. And in fact, if I remember right, it shows up at about 16. So it performs relatively very poorly for the 4th best team. Was the best approach for the number 3 team, but not effective for the 4th best. I thought that was very curious. So let's look at the 5th best team. Again, the chance of it finishing 3rd, not dependent on the type of on the bracket that you use. Let's again focus on the top performing setups for this one. And now all 3 of them that we saw earlier are showing up at the top. So GFED, CDAB, JLK, NM. This is the one that was the best for the 4th best team. This is the one that was the best for the 3rd best team, this one right here. And this is the one that's always been in the mix in between there. So it's the one that we still see showing up. And so all 3 of them have been really good. And this assessment I'm actually looking at is the ability to get into the 4th through the 8th position and looking at those. Let's jump out to 9th just because we can. Not much going on. 9th best team doesn't finish for 3rd or 4th all that much. In terms of whether it finishes 7th through 16th, these are all about 80%. Not a big difference there. The best one of this is that EFGH, AB, CD, JL, K, M, and M. That's the one that we've been seeing otherwise. And then this is JL. This is, I think this is the wrong one. JLK. This is down here is the one that is the best for the position, or for the 3rd best team. And here's, no, wait a minute, it's JILKNM. This is the one. This is the one that was best for the 4th position, and this is the best, that was the one for the 3rd position. So you can see they come in pretty much the same in this regard. So there's not a big difference between them. Again, the best one is this EFGH ABCD that we've been seeing, and these other 2 are coming a little bit lower, but not the same. Let's stop looking at that. That's not all that useful anymore. So I've gone through and I've done that type of an analysis with all the different positions along the way and said, you know, how well does the 4th, 5th best team, 6th best team, 7th, and everything like that. And so here's an example of what you see for the overall results. How well does the bracket reflect the outcome for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 9th, 13th best teams? And all I'm doing is looking at a rating of each one and then summing it up at the end and saying, how many points do you have, right? And so that's the way it is. The best overall results we see are for the bracket G, H, E, F, C, D, A, B, J, I, L, K, N, M. This is the one that, in fact, was 2nd best for the 3rd, best for the 4th, 5th, 13th, and so on. And so, yeah, that's the one that performed best overall. The 2nd best overall is this EFGH ABCD JLKNM, and he does pretty well for most of them. Runs into trouble a little bit at 4th and 13th. The bracket that does the best for position 3 is this GHEFCDAB KLIJMN. But notice overall, he really struggles, especially when you get outside of the 3rd best team. You know, 4th is really bad. 5th, 6th, 9th is not as good in those either. And so even if it didn't have this really bad performance for the 4th best team, it still wouldn't be able to compete with this one in the overall. So I've taken a look at that, and so remember what we have here. So this is the one GHEFCDABJLKNM. This is the one that was better overall but worse on the 3rd best team, versus GHEFCDABKLIJMN, which was better on the 3rd but worse on the others. And so let's, if we take a look at the comparison between them. And I'm not going to go through too many of the numbers, but like at the 3rd best team, the difference is that the bottom one here, that's the MN one, KLIJMN, does a better job of getting the 3rd best team into 4th position, and so that has an advantage. But once you get up to and so we'll give him a star there. But when you get up to the 4th best team, the JILKNM, it does a better job of getting it into the 5th and 6th position. So give him a star. Same thing here. They're pretty close. Here, it's still advantage. For the 7th best team, it's more likely to be in the 7th best position. So advantage JLKNM, and we can keep going down the line. And there are a lot of stars along the way. And overall, the answer is that GHEFCDABJILKNM is overall better than GHEFCDABKLIJMN. KLIJMN, and that's the conclusion that we draw out of this. It is true that this is better for getting the third best team into fourth place, as it is, but this is better overall for the rest of the levels, and almost across the board. And just for fun and for comparison, let's take a look at GHEFCDAB GALKNM versus HGFEDCBA JIKLNM. That's not worse on either, anything like that. These are just different ones, so don't worry about that. That's just a holdover. If you look through here, I'm not going to go through it too much. There's really not much difference between them. Small differences, 0.5% and things like that, are within the statistical noise. The only one where it actually looks like could be a real difference is down here for the 9th best team, that there could be some variation in that. But otherwise, overall, the HGFEDCBA JIKLKNM is the same as GHEFCDBA JILKNM. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes when I make brackets myself, I actually, I don't bring it down GH down to here. I actually, take the loser of A and bring it all the way down to the bottom, and then loser of B down to the next bottom, and by the time I'm done, I take the loser of H and he goes all the way to the top. It's very common to do that, but I don't think there's a big difference between those two approaches, and so my modeling that I've done here shouldn't be a problem and should be giving us good enough answers in that. I don't know if this is if this is a typo and that I made a technical error, or if it's actually real, but otherwise there's not much of a difference between them. So here's the results for our 32-team double elimination tournament and what is going to be our preferred bracket setup. This is our recommended bracket setup for this type of a tournament. Again, so given the same notation that we used before, the approach is going to be GHEFCDAB JILKNM. Let's think about why it works. This is always something to do. This is not just an issue of putting things in random letters and stuff like that. Let's think about there's a reason why this is going to be better. And so, what do you do in this tournament? So the first thing you do is at the losers of A and B, what you're going to do is you're going to bring them to the bottom. So we're doing a huge crossover at that point. So CD is doing an internal crossover, but it's still moving from top bracket down to bottom bracket, top bracket down to bottom bracket to top, bottom bracket to top. And so that's the first crossover that we're going to be doing. The second one is a crossover, but it's not going to be making those big changes this time, right? It's not going to be top to bottom. It's going to be within the top bracket. We're going to do a crossover between I and J. And we do that same thing in the bottom. Within the bottom, we do the crossover between K and L. Now, interestingly, and this is where, if I had predicted this ahead of time, I thought maybe now is the time that you want to do actually a homostatic approach, bring M and N straight back, but no, sure enough, that modeling shows that if we do want to do another crossover approach at this time, so everybody from the top all the way to the bottom, everybody from the bottom all the way to the top. So for M and N, they're going to cross over as well. In fact, if you look at the modeling, I was really surprised to see this. It's not all that close. So GHEFCDAB JILKMN is not all that competitive in terms of its performance. I don't think it performs better than this in pretty much anything. So that's the type of approach we want to do. But look what we've done in the end. So the first, we started out with big crossover top to bottom. Then we did a small crossover within, and then we did another big crossover. So we're mixing that crossover steps up in time in terms of setting this thing up. You can see the same thing in the second approach. It's EFGHABCDJLLKNM. In fact, this is very similar to the first one. The only place it changes is in that first round. So instead of taking this and bringing it all the way down here, what we can do is take this one and bring it down here, and C and D come down to here. Instead of having them come within, they're actually jumping out, or they're just moving a little more rationally that way. That's the only place it changes. Otherwise, the JILK is exact same changes before. M and N is changing just the same as before. So it's the only difference between those two is how they change in the first round. And the one thing that they have in common is that everybody from the bottom moves to the top. It's either like that or is like this. Okay, from there it's still JILK and M. And those are the two best approaches for doing. All right, so what can we conclude about the 32-team double elimination tournament? What have we learned from this? With the 32-team double elimination tournament, there are a lot of different crossover approaches that you can have. You can have internal crosses, little bigger crosses, even great big top and bottom crossovers. A lot of different ways to do it, so you just have to look into the possibilities. But it really does matter how you cross over in these types of tournaments. Consistently, the best setups are the ones where there's a combination of crossing over between different brackets. Avoid these. I don't think we saw anything where homostatic type changes are all that useful. I guess the MN was in the one, but we want to have combinations of crossing over, big crossovers, small crossovers, no crossovers. You want to mix those types of things up, so you don't always bring them between the top and the bottom. You always want to, so going to EFGH on the top, and then KLIJ and then NM wouldn't be as effective either. So you want to mix those types of crossovers up. The best approach for getting the third best team is in the right place is GHEFCDABKLIJ, but overall the best approach for getting all the teams in the right position is GHEFCDABJILK and M. That's kind of a surprise that the third best, the team, the one that works best for third place doesn't work best overall, but that's the way what we found out. It's not like this is bad for third best team, make no mistake. It's actually the second best way to get there, but it's better overall. And the last thing we want to note is that EHEFCDAB is pretty much the same as HGFEDCBA. And the reason this is going to be important is because coming up in a subsequent video, one of the next videos we're going to do, we're going to start talking about applications of tournaments and see how tournament setups happen. The HGFEDCBA, that's the approach that's actually used in the Iowa High School State Wrestling Tournament. And so hopefully we can say that our GFEFCDAB modeling is going to help us understand what's happening at the Iowa High School State Wrestling Tournament. And so that's going to be the subject of an upcoming video. So for now, we're done with the different types of tournaments. We've done 4, 8, 16, 32 teams. And so going in the future, what we're going to do is look at some applications.